The submarine was found after 42 years, and inside, it revealed a terrifying story. The sonar pinged once, then again, and then silence. The dive team thought it was just a glitch, an underwater echo, a ghost signal. But when they recalibrated and looked closer, they saw it, buried deep beneath the silt and salt of the Atlantic floor. A rusted shape, unnaturally preserved. A submarine, one that hadn't been seen in over 42 years. It was the USS Elysium, a Cold War-era vessel that had disappeared during a routine test in 1983. No distress calls, no wreckage, just gone. Declared lost with all hands, families mourned, files were sealed, but no one ever expected it to be found, especially not intact, sealed from the inside, and definitely not in waters it was never supposed to be in. The rescue crew wasn't prepared. When they finally broke the hatch, a wave of foul, cold air rushed out, as if something inside had been waiting. They descended one by one, flashlights flickered, dust and rust covered everything. But then they found the logs, handwritten pages nailed to the walls with knives, messages, pleas, warnings, and everyone ended with the same phrase, "It's still here." But no bodies were found, no skeletons, no signs of human remains. Yet the crew had clearly lost their minds before the end. Some pages were written in blood, some in languages no one could identify. One entry described a shadow moving inside the hull, breathing, following, whispering. Another spoke of voices through the pipes and something knocking back. The submarine was towed to a secure facility. The public never heard about it, but one of the divers recorded everything and disappeared days later. Only his footage remained. No one knows where it ends. Because the last clip cuts to black right after a sound echoed through the hull, 3 knocks from the inside. If this is your first time here, I need you to stop what you're doing and listen closely. Because what I'm about to tell you has never been shown on television, never been released to the press. And when you hear the final detail, you'll understand exactly why it was buried for 42 years. In 1983, a US Navy submarine vanished off the coast of Florida. No wreckage, no mayday. Nothing. The government declared it an unfortunate training accident, a tragic mechanical failure, end of story, except it wasn't, not even close. Because 42 years later, a deep-sea sonar team detected something buried under the Atlantic silt. And when they reached it, they realized the truth was worse than they could have imagined. Tonight, you'll hear everything. The documents, the logs, the voices, and what may have followed the crew into madness, or worse, back to the surface. But before we dive deeper, I want you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and comment below. What country and city are you watching this from? That way I know exactly who's brave enough to face what's coming. Because once we go down, there's no resurfacing. It began like any other deep-sea expedition, a contracted research team funded quietly by a private defense group, tasked with mapping parts of the Atlantic seafloor. They weren't looking for lost vessels. They were testing new sonar, routine, boring even, until they hit a hard return 5,300 meters below the surface, a shape, oblong, long, metal, and perfectly aligned with nothing. The operator paused. He called over his lead, Dr. Alyssa Crane. She squinted at the monitor. The outline was too clean to be natural. Not a rock formation, not a cave system. Something cylindrical, about 300 feet long. "Is that a torpedo?" someone asked, but Crane already knew. "It's a submarine." They ran the model through the naval archives. One match, USS Elysium, declared lost at sea in May 1983, reported sunk off the Pacific coast during a test run. The crew, 54 men and women, listed as killed. Crane frowned. Why the hell is it in the Atlantic? No one had an answer. Within 24 hours, a deep dive capsule was launched. 2 divers, 1 camera operator, limited oxygen. They descended in silence, the pressure building, the light vanishing. As they reached the seafloor, the object came into view, half buried in the sand, but untouched by corrosion, as if it had only landed yesterday. The hull markings were intact, SSN 612 Elysium. The Navy serial number was still readable. But more disturbing was the state of the vessel. The hatch was sealed from the inside. No signs of explosive damage, no signs of forced entry. Just silence, and a strange black residue trailing from the edges of the seams. They circled the vessel with flashlights. Something was off. The shadows didn't behave like they should. Angles felt wrong. Every light cast a second reflection, just a beat behind the first. And then came the sound. A slow, metallic knock from inside the submarine, 3 times, then silence again. The divers froze. One of them, Nick, whispered, "Did you hear that?" The operator above radioed in, asking for confirmation. Crane replayed the audio. It was there, 3 definite knocks. Not structural, intentional, like someone answering. Back on the surface, they debated opening it. The chain of command hesitated, but curiosity won. The next dive brought a remote manipulator arm and a high-pressure seal cutter. They began slicing through the external hatch. As soon as the metal broke, a hiss of air escaped, cold, pressurized, and decayed. The arm pushed the door open. Inside was complete darkness. The camera adjusted. The corridor looked intact. No flooding, no damage. Just stillness. But then something drifted into view. A piece of paper, torn, stained, with jagged handwriting. "Turn back. It watches." Crane called off the dive. Too late. The signal cut out. The feed went to static. Then, for one brief second, the camera flickered back, just long enough to show a silhouette at the far end of the hallway. Tall, not human, but staring. The following morning they sent a human crew, 4 men, 1 woman. Armed with oxygen, headlamps, and GoPros strapped to their chests. The hatch had remained open overnight, but the air inside was dense, like stepping into a sealed tomb. The lead diver, Lieutenant Marcus Bell, was the first to enter. As his boot touched the floor of the USS Elysium, his flashlight dimmed for a second, then flickered back on, as if resisting. The corridor was narrow, metallic, still. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was pressurized, like the air itself was holding its breath. Walls were coated in a black film, almost like soot, but too oily, too alive. Bell reached out to scrape a sample, but as soon as he touched it, the wall throbbed under his glove, just once. Like something had flinched. Further in, they found the crew quarters, beds still made, lockers closed. Photos of family members stuck to walls with old tape, but not a single sign of human remains. No bones, no clothing scattered, as if everyone had simply stood up and vanished. And yet, the room smelled of bodies like sweat, fear, and rot. Lieutenant Daniels opened the mess hall door. He gagged instantly. The floor was covered in pages, torn, stained, nailed to the walls with eating utensils, forks, knives. Some papers had diagrams, others had rambling words, spiraling sentences, paragraphs repeated hundreds of times like mantras. One read, "Don't drink the water, don't breathe the pipes, don't speak." The kitchen held no food, but the refrigerator was running. Despite no power source, inside it was empty, except for a severed hand placed gently on a dinner plate with a note beneath it. This one fed it. None of the crew claimed responsibility for writing it. As they reached the control room, a low-frequency hum began vibrating the walls. In the darkness, buttons lit up on their own. Monitors flickered. Bell stepped forward, raising his camera. A logbook sat on the central console. He flipped it open and screamed. The pages weren't written in ink, they were etched in fingernail scratches. One entry said, "I told it my name, now it has my voice." Behind them, something clanged. A panel door had shut on its own. The crew spun around, weapons raised, but no movement, no signs of life, only the hallway, and a trail of water now running upward along the walls and ceiling, defying gravity like it was flowing towards something, or being pulled. The team leader ordered a retreat. But the hatch, the one that had remained open for hours, was now sealed shut. They tried opening it. It wouldn't budge, not jammed, locked from the outside. Daniel swore he heard laughing in the pipes above them, something rhythmic, like a child humming. They backtracked to the sleeping quarters, hoping for a ventilation escape. That's when Bell found the second body part, a human tongue nailed to the door. Below it, carved into the steel, "Told you not to speak." The woman in the crew, Harris, began whispering prayers. Her flashlight started blinking in Morse. No one was touching it. It spelled out, "Let us finish." Trapped, the crew set up emergency beacon transmission. They uploaded all footage to the surface team. Then, without speaking, they sat in the mess hall, surrounded by notes, messages, and something breathing in the vents. Before the camera cut, Bell turned toward it and said, "If anyone finds this, don't come down here. It's not a ship anymore. It's a tomb that writes back." When the support team finally restored signal, they received a full 6-minute upload. It was raw, shaky, and nearly unwatchable. But among the grain and flicker, they saw something critical. A small black notebook wedged between pipes in the engine room, pulled out by Lieutenant Harris. It was barely held together, charred at the edges, water-warped. But it was real, the captain's personal log. It began normally, maintenance notes, crew reports. Course coordinates. Then came a page with a date scratched out so hard it tore through the paper. The log below it changed tone. "We heard something through the sonar tonight. It wasn't natural, it responded." Followed by a second line, messier. "It followed us." The entries grew erratic. One page was written upside down, another had teeth marks along the corner. The captain stopped referring to the crew by name. He called them voices, echoes, fragments. Then this. Petty Officer Lang began humming in his sleep, a hymn none of us knew. He slit his tongue the next day. Pages were glued together with what looked like blood. When Harris pried them apart, they revealed a diagram, not of the submarine, but something beneath it. A ring, an eye, coordinates pointing not to any location, but to depth, written in red ink. We went too far down. Something woke up. The most disturbing entry was a drawing. It took up the entire page, a humanoid figure, skinless, its face covered in nails arranged in rows. Each nail had a number. Each number corresponded to a crew member. The caption beneath, "It's counting us. It's learning our names." On the opposite page was a single line, scrawled with shaking hands. "I gave it mine. It smiles now when I sleep." After that, the handwriting changed. Sharper. Wrong. As if someone else had taken over the captain's journal, someone who knew how to write but didn't understand why. The surface team ran the logs through analysis. Some entries were coded, military cipher, but others were in no known language, just symbols, loops and spirals. A linguist compared them to Enochian, Sumerian, even pre-Egyptian carvings. None matched. One sentence kept appearing between drawings. "The deep does not forget." And then, the deeper the crew went into the ship, the more writing they found, on doors, pipes, ceilings, some in ink, some in flesh carved with nails or knives. Lieutenant Bell found a wall covered in fingerprints. They weren't human, too long, too thin, 6 digits each, trailing from inside the captain's quarters outward. Inside the quarters, they found the last log. "If you read this, you've already invited it. It doesn't stay in metal. It doesn't need walls. It's in words, it's in breath, it's in memory." Taped to the wall beside it, a mirror cracked, and one final phrase etched into the glass, "Do not speak its name." The video cut out at 6:02, no audio, just static, and then, briefly, a face. Not anyone from the dive crew, not anyone in the Navy. Its eyes were hollow, its mouth stitched shut, but it was smiling, not at the camera, at whoever was watching. The air shifted, not just in temperature, but in weight. The deeper the crew moved inside the Elysium, the more it felt like walking through water instead of air. Sound moved slower. Lights dimmed faster, and every hallway echoed, not just their own voices, but others, just behind them, repeating, warped, whispered. Daniels was the first to notice the shadows. They didn't move like they should. His flashlight revealed outlines that didn't match any of the crew. Too tall, wrong posture. And always facing the team, even when there was no way for them to be standing. He tried to film it, but every recording came out static, except one. A 5-second clip where something blinked from the ceiling. Harris began humming, the same hymn mentioned in the captain's log. She didn't realize she was doing it, even after Bell grabbed her arm and asked what she was singing. Her lips moved slower than her breath, as if her voice belonged to someone else. When they played it back later, the hymn had words, "We remember you, we know your name." The submarine vibrated every hour, as if breathing. Vents hissed softly, but with rhythm, almost like a pulse. Then came the voices. Not from the pipes, but from inside the crew's helmets. Bell heard a child laughing. Harris heard her dead sister. Daniels heard himself, begging to be let out. They tried to call the surface. No signal, only feedback. Until a voice came through, deep and mechanical. "Open the hatch, let it out." But the hatch was already open now. And that's when they realized the voice wasn't coming from above, but from below, from the floor of the vessel, from beneath the metal. In the torpedo bay, they found another message, written in black, sticky ink across the walls. "We fed it metal, we fed it names, but it always wanted memory. The torpedoes were still intact, but each one had been marked with names of the crew. Only one remained unmarked. Daniel stepped forward and saw his own name appear on it, slowly, letter by letter, without ink. Lights failed, every lamp, every helmet, camera, complete darkness. The crew turned on emergency glow sticks, but they flickered in patterns, not light, like Morse code. One pulse kept repeating, knock, knock, knock. Then they heard it, the same sound from day one. 3 knocks, only now. They were coming from inside the walls. They followed the sound. Back to the control room, where every screen was now on, but not showing instruments. They were showing faces, crew members long dead, staring, mouths moving, no sound, except on the central monitor, where only one word played in an endless loop. Stay. Daniels tried to pull Harris back, but she was already walking toward the engine room, her eyes fully white, no pupils, muttering names none of them recognized. Bell reached for her, but the metal floor buckled beneath him. Not from age, but from something moving beneath it, like muscle or hunger. They dragged Harris back. She didn't fight. She just whispered, "We're not the first. We're just the first. It will remember." And as they turned to run, the submarine sealed one of the doors behind them, not hydraulically, not mechanically. It closed like a mouth, slow, wet, final. The silence didn't last. Within minutes of sealing the hatch, the walls began to vibrate again, but this time in rhythm with human breath. Harris sat against the corridor wall, eyes closed, murmuring words none of the crew could decipher. Daniels asked her what she was saying. She opened her eyes slowly and replied, "I'm not saying it. He is." No one asked who he was. They moved cautiously toward the forward deck, trying to retrace their steps to the emergency beacon. As they reached the intersection near the sleeping quarters, they heard it. A voice, clear, human, male. "Marcus, come back." Bell froze. That was his father's voice, except Bell's father had died 6 years ago. He turned anyway. The hallway was empty. But the voice returned, this time behind him. "Son, why did you leave me there?" Daniels grabbed his arm, but Bell jerked away. He looked terrified, pale, as if remembering something that hadn't happened. He whispered, "He sounds exactly the same." Then added, "But he never called me by my name. Not like that." Further down the corridor, Harris stopped. She was staring at the overhead vent. From inside came soft whispering, a child's voice, repeating her name over and over. "Alyssa, Alyssa, Alyssa, Alyssa." It wasn't aggressive. It was desperate, like a lost child calling for help. But Harris didn't have siblings. She never had a child. Daniels checked his communicator. It was blinking erratically, not transmitting, but recording. The playback showed his own voice, speaking a sentence he never said. "Let me in, I'm cold." He backed away. The walls moaned, and somewhere behind them something laughed, low and hoarse, like lungs full of salt water. They found a crew manifest, every name, every rank, 54 listed. But someone had written a 55th name at the bottom. Shaky, bloody. "It doesn't need to eat, it only needs to be remembered." The name scrawled beneath, Marcus Bell. Daniel stared at Bell, who was already shaking his head. "I never served on this sub. This was before I was born." They reached the beacon chamber, or what was left of it. The equipment was intact but covered in handprints, hundreds, pressed into the walls, ceiling, and even the inside of the beacon glass. Some were small, like children, Others were inhumanly long, with 7 or 8 fingers each. One still dripped something dark and warm. Belle activated the transmitter. It lit up, but instead of sending, it began playing audio, not a signal, a recording. It was the voice of their support team lead, Dr. Crane, but distorted, slowed, echoed. "You shouldn't have come. It hears every breath you take." The audio looped once, then the beacon burst into sparks. In the dark, Daniels dropped to his knees. He whispered, "It's not trying to kill us. It's trying to become us." And suddenly they understood. Every whisper, every name, every face they'd seen on the monitors. It wasn't memory. It was imitation, a parasite of sound, of identity. It was rehearsing. They fled the beacon chamber, only to find the hallway longer than before. The ship had changed, the layout warped. Behind them, the walls echoed their steps. Half a second late, almost like something was walking just behind them, learning how. The final voice they heard before the lights died, it was Belle's, screaming from the other side of the door. The hallway didn't end, no matter how far they walked. The same corridor repeated itself, same dents in the metal, same broken light flickering. At first, they thought they were going in circles. Then they noticed the faces. Behind the frosted glass of the cabin doors were silhouettes, watching, not moving, just staring. Belle approached one of the windows. He wiped it with his glove and gasped. On the other side was himself, but older, eyes missing, mouth sewn shut, and yet it was smiling, as if waiting for Belle to recognize him. The reflection blinked. Belle didn't. Daniels tried smashing one of the doors. It didn't budge. Not even a scratch. He screamed into the hallway, "What do you want from us?" No answer, but the lights flickered in sequence. A pattern of 3. 1, 2. Pause, then 3 more, almost like a heartbeat. Harris fell to her knees. She was clutching her head, whispering to herself. She said the walls were breathing, that she could hear them thinking. And then she began to laugh. Not manic, but relieved, like she finally understood something that no one else did. As they moved forward, the submarine changed. Walls bent, ceilings sloped. The metal seemed to pulse under their feet. It wasn't a ship anymore. It was organic, alive, and it wasn't holding them captive. It was studying them. Belle found a hatch labeled Engine Room that hadn't been there before. He opened it, but instead of machinery, he saw a hospital hallway, fluorescent lights, peeling white walls, a gurney left in the center. He turned to Harris and whispered, "This is where my brother died." She didn't question it. She nodded. The submarine had become memory. Daniels opened another door. It revealed a living room, Midwestern furniture, a Christmas tree, a photograph of his mother, except her face was blurred out and her hands had 7 fingers each. He backed away, terrified. The door shut itself. The photo burned behind the glass. The team realized they were no longer navigating a vessel. They were walking through constructed minds, each room tailored, each detail perfect, but wrong, like a dream you remember too clearly. Belle muttered, "It's inside us now. It knows what hurts. It's using memory like map coordinates." As they passed the torpedo bay again, it had changed too, no longer mechanical. Now it resembled a church, benches, candles. A giant stained glass window at the far end, depicting a twisted version of the Elysium itself, sinking into darkness, dragging angels with it. At the altar, a mirror, cracked and glowing faintly. Bell walked up to it. His reflection smiled, but didn't match his movements. Behind him in the mirror stood the entire original crew, skinless, hollow-eyed, mouths moving in unison, whispering, "Finish the voyage." He blinked, and when he turned around, the crew was gone. But something else had joined them in the room, and it knew their names. It began with silence, not the kind that settles when fear creeps in, but the kind that feels deliberate, as if something had cut the air itself. The three of them stood motionless in the mirror room, watching the glass tremble slightly, as if responding to a pulse they couldn't hear. Bell turned to Daniels, and Daniels spoke. But the voice wasn't his. It was Harris's voice, word for word, tone, cadence. But her lips never moved. Only Daniels did. He said perfectly, "We should stay. It's safer now. It knows us." Harris backed away, eyes wide. Daniels blinked, confused. He didn't remember speaking. Bell asked him to repeat what he just said. Daniels looked puzzled. "I didn't say anything." Harris was shaking. She stepped toward him, examined his face, and whispered, "Your eyes. They're wrong." Daniels stepped back, chuckling nervously, but the laugh was Bell's. They dragged him out of the room, locking the door behind them. Daniels began humming again, same tune, same pitch. This time, the words were clearer. "Depth remembers, steel forgets, flesh carries." He suddenly fell silent, looked up, and said, "It likes your memories, Marcus. They taste familiar." Bell and Harris realized the truth. The entity wasn't just observing. It had found a host. It moved like sound, mimicked like reflection, and now it wore Daniels like a suit. But not all the time, just enough to blur the line, enough to make them question what was real. In an attempt to isolate him, they sealed Daniels in the comms room. But the lights flickered and screens began showing loops. Recordings of Bell's childhood, moments he'd never shared, conversations that never happened. And in every one, Daniels stood in the background, silent, watching. Harris attempted to contact the surface. This time, a reply came through. It was her own voice. "You're not supposed to leave, not yet. You still owe it a story." She dropped the headset. Bell grabbed her hand. They ran. But the layout had changed again. Doors they'd locked were now open. Hallways led to places that didn't exist. And from every corridor they could hear Daniels, sometimes crying, sometimes singing, sometimes speaking with both of their voices at once. He wasn't chasing them. He was waiting ahead. They reached the navigation deck. Maps were scattered on the floor, but the oceans were missing. Only depth numbers were written, repeated, scratched, reversed. One phrase written in blood across the console: "He is not one. He is all who listen." Then Daniel's voice came from the vents. "Come back. Finish your reflection." Bell turned to Harris and whispered, "He's not just possessed. He's becoming the ship." Before she could respond, the metal around them began to bend, not from pressure, but from will. The Elysium was no longer a submarine. It was a throat, and it had just started swallowing. Time failed first. The emergency lights flashed in a rhythm no longer synced to seconds. 10 pulses, then none for minutes, then 30 in under a breath. Bell's watch stopped at 0309. Harris's jumped ahead to 1642. Every screen on the console now displayed clocks, but all showed different dates, some from the future, some from before the Elysium was even built. The corridors changed next. Metal became brick, then dirt, then hospital tile. They passed a doorway labeled home. Bell opened it and saw himself, 5 years old, drowning in a bathtub as a woman stood frozen, watching, unmoving. When he slammed the door shut, water leaked from beneath the frame. They turned down a passage and re-entered the mirror room, though they had never gone backward. This time, the stained glass was shattered, and through the broken frame, they saw the ocean, black, endless, and inverted. Waves rolled upward. The sky was beneath them, and floating above that sea was a door, just a door, suspended, glowing. Daniels waited in the center of the room. He was humming again, but now his body flickered like an old tape glitching. Sometimes he had no face, sometimes he was Harris, sometimes Bell, sometimes something without skin. He smiled. Reality is suggestion here. It listens to whatever you fear most. Bell tried to fire the emergency flare. It vanished reappeared in the wall, frozen mid-frame. The smoke moved sideways. Harris clutched her ears and screamed, "I can hear my teeth growing." She wasn't wrong. Something inside her was moving independently, not possession, mutation. The submarine moaned, not mechanically, but like something trying to wake up. Ceilings liquefied. The floor rolled like muscle under skin. Every surface was wet, and in every direction faces pressed through the metal. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all from the original crew. But none had eyes, and all were smiling. They ran, where it didn't matter. Nothing was linear anymore. Every turn fed back into itself. Hallways curved into rooms they hadn't entered yet. Doors opened to screams from next week. They saw themselves, arguing, dying, embracing versions that hadn't happened, versions that still might. Bell collapsed in the mess hall. The table was covered in teeth, not human, not animal, just teeth. A voice from inside the intercom whispered, "You've been here longer than you remember." Harris stared into her reflection in the silverware, but it blinked before she did, and bled. Daniels entered again, but now he wasn't flickering. He was solid, confident. He reached out his hand and spoke in a voice that was all of theirs combined. "Stop resisting. You are already written." Behind him, the walls folded inward like paper, revealing that the submarine had never been metal, only memory. Bell looked down. His body was transparent. He saw his own skeleton through his chest. He screamed. Harris was dissolving into static. The Elysium wasn't breaking. It was editing, rewriting them into its next chapter. And the last thing Bell heard before his ears closed forever was his own voice, whispering, "You never left." Bell awoke on the floor. The floor wasn't metal anymore. It was breathing, rising and falling like a lung. He stood, but there was no gravity, only the suggestion of weight. Around him everything pulsed with dim light, as if powered by thought rather than electricity. There were no doors, no walls, only a hallway made of memory. Every step he took showed him something new, not ahead, but within. Harris, as a child, alone in a school hallway, repeating the word present to no one. Daniels screaming underwater as hands pulled him deeper. His own mother, eyes stitched shut, whispering prayers to a god he didn't recognize. They weren't visions, They were installations, programmed truths, echoes placed where logic used to live. He heard Harris's voice, not near, not far, just around. She said, "I found the black box. It's not a recording, it's a confession." Then silence, then sobbing, then her voice again, but lower, inhuman. It wrote over me. The descent wasn't physical. There was no ladder, no shaft, just a feeling, a pulling, as if the ship was inside him now, dragging his soul towards something ancient, a weight behind the eyes. His memories began to blur. He couldn't remember what Daniels looked like, or if he'd ever existed at all. Bell passed a room where time was reversed. Blood flowed upward into wounds. Tears slipped back into ducts. Harris stood in the center, mouth wide, eyes glowing, whispering backward. The floor was made of typewriter keys. Each step spelled something in Latin. He didn't translate. He didn't need to. He felt it. This was never yours. Then he heard it, a deep mechanical moan, the sound of metal being bent by grief, the core. It wasn't where the engine should be. It was below all memory, beneath logic, beneath pain. It pulsed like a heart and whispered like a mouth. We were always the same story. He reached the threshold. There was no door, only a hole in reality, edges frayed like burnt paper. Inside he saw the crew, all 54. Not dead, not alive, just paused, like film stuck on a frame, each one with a mirror where their face should be, each one reflecting him. He stepped in. The air turned thick, not with water, but with memory density. Every breath replayed something, his first lie, his last promise. The day he almost jumped off a bridge, the time he said, "I love you," and didn't mean it. The time he meant it and said nothing. The ship was watching, absorbing, scoring. From the center of the room, a figure rose. It looked like Daniels, but older, melting, bleeding memory like vapor. It walked to Bell and placed its hand on his chest. No pressure, just presence, and whispered, "You descended the moment you opened the hatch. The sea was just a metaphor." Bell looked down. The floor became glass. Beneath it, the real Elysium. Rusted, broken, lost at the bottom of the ocean. Empty, silent, no crew, no logs, just a single black box still blinking, still recording, still transmitting. Not to a base, but to him. Bell opened his eyes to daylight, real daylight, sharp, blinding blue. Waves rocked the raft beneath him. A helicopter circled above, voices on radios. He was wrapped in silver foil, hands trembling, salt dried into his skin. A medic leaned over him and asked, "What's your name?" And Bell didn't answer. They said he was found floating 14 miles off the grid. No distress signal, no trace of the Elysium, no crew, no logbooks. Just him and a waterlogged notebook tied to his chest with fishing line. Every page was blank, except one. "Do not open." At the debrief, he lied. He said the pressure chamber failed, said the crew drowned, said he swam out the escape hatch. He didn't mention the shifting rooms, or the mirror people, or how Daniels still whispered in his sleep. He left those truths where they belonged, in the spaces behind his eyelids. Weeks passed. Bell went home, to what used to be home. But things didn't fit anymore. The hallway was too short. The fridge light flickered in threes. The mirror in the bathroom never showed him blink. He shaved in the dark. He covered every reflection. Harris was gone. No body, no report. No one in Naval Command remembered her name. She'd been erased. Only Bell seemed to recall her voice, her fear, her last words before the shift. "It's rewriting us." And when he whispered her name, The lights dimmed, always. He stopped sleeping. Every dream was a hallway. Every hallway led to the mirror room. Sometimes the faces smiled, sometimes they screamed, sometimes they said his name over and over, but each time in a different voice, some not human, some that hadn't been born yet. One night he heard something knock from inside the wall. Not the door, not the floor, the wall. 3 taps, silence, 3 more. He pressed his ear against the plaster and heard breathing. Not behind the wall, inside it. He checked the black notebook again. Still only 1 page with writing. Still, do not open. So he burned it. Watched the ashes spiral up, turn to smoke, and then to words, hovering mid-air for half a second. Too late. They vanished before he could scream. Belle vanished 3 weeks later. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just a message written in steam on the bathroom mirror. I finished the voyage, and beneath it, scratched into the glass, he brought something back. But the mirror cracked, but only on the inside. They never found him, but the reflection in his mirror still appears some nights. Different house, different owners, same face, smiling, blinking out of sync, and if you stay too long, it whispers a question. What did you see beneath? Then it answers itself, you. They said the sea forgets, that it swallows metal, memory, and man alike. But some things don't sink, some things cling. The Elysium was never about depth, it was about reflection. And once you look into something long enough, it doesn't just stare back, it waits. Marcus Bell never came back from that voyage. Maybe he drowned. Maybe he walked into a room that never ended. Or maybe he merged with the vessel that wrote itself through him. Because now, from time to time, radios still pick up static in the North Atlantic. Frequencies that carry a voice, chanting in 3 languages, always ending the same way. I'm still on board. And if you listen closely, if you're standing by the coast during a storm, sometimes the wind carries a hum, a melody from a man who isn't a man anymore, a voice calling from the deep, not for help, but for witnesses, because once you've heard the Elysium, you're part of it, forever.